We need to talk about what is happening with the Indiana fever right now. And I mean really talk about it, with the seriousness and the directness this situation actually deserves. Because something went down during that preseason game on the 25th between the Indiana Fever and the New York Liberty that has the entire basketball world buzzing, that has social media erupting, and that has raised questions so significant and so uncomfortable that they cannot be dismissed, cannot be minimized, and absolutely cannot be ignored. The Indiana Fever walked into that building and walked out with a dominant victory. That part is settled. The result was not in question. Indiana handled the Liberty convincingly and left New York having made a clear statement about what this team is building and what it intends to be when the games actually count. That victory is real and it matters. But here is what else is real. The day after that game ended, footage started surfacing, moments that the official broadcast did not capture. Interactions that the live cameras either missed entirely or simply chose not to prioritize. And among everything that came out of that post-game review process, one specific incident has ignited a conversation that is not going away. That incident involves Breanna Stewart and Sophie Cunningham. And once you actually see what the footage shows, once you sit with it and process it honestly, the questions it raises are impossible to brush aside. Let's start with something that needs to be understood clearly before we get into the details of the play itself. The footage that has everyone talking did not come from the official broadcast. It was not captured by a professional television camera crew working the game. It was filmed by a fan sitting in the arena stands. Think about what that actually means. The only reason this play exists in the public record, the only reason we are able to see what happened and have this conversation at all, is because one person in the crowd had their phone pointed at the right spot at the right moment. Without that fan, without that specific angle from those specific seats, this play disappears entirely. It becomes a moment that happened in a professional basketball game and left no trace. The broadcast did not capture it. The official record would not contain it. The conversation we are having right now would not exist. That is not a minor footnote. That is the central fact that frames everything else about this story. Because if it happened once, if one play of this significance slipped through the broadcast without documentation, then the question that follows immediately and unavoidably is how many other plays like this one have happened without a fan camera in the right place at the right time to preserve the evidence? That question does not have a comfortable answer. Now let's talk about what the footage actually shows, because this deserves precise, careful description. Breanna Stewart, the New York Liberty star and one of the most prominent established players in the entire WNBA, initiates contact with Sophie Cunningham. Let's be direct about what kind of contact this is. It is not incidental. It is not the unavoidable physical collision that happens constantly in a basketball game as bodies compete for position and space. What the footage documents is a deliberate, directed motion, a leaning forward action with an elbow involved, making contact with Cunningham in a way that reads clearly as intentional. This is not two players accidentally occupying the same space at the same moment. This reads as a calculated choice. This reads as a decision. And then immediately after that contact is made, Stewart throws her hands up. Let that detail register fully because it is one of the most revealing elements of the entire sequence. The hands go up right away. The universal gesture of innocence, the "I didn't do anything, don't look at me" signal, it appears before anyone around her has even had time to fully process what just happened. That immediate, reflexive, preemptive declaration of innocence is not what players do when contact is genuinely accidental. When a collision happens in the natural flow of basketball competition, you do not immediately perform innocence for the officials. You keep playing. You do not need to manage the narrative in real time because there is no narrative to manage. That hands-up reflex is what you do when you are aware in the moment that what you just did is questionable. It is the physical equivalent of getting ahead of the story before the referee has time to process it. Watch the footage. Watch the sequence. Watch the deliberateness of the contact and then watch how quickly those hands go up afterward. The two things together tell you something that neither one alone would tell you as clearly. Sophie Cunningham is on the receiving end of all of this. And that matters in ways that go beyond this single play. Now, what did the officials actually do in response? This is where the conversation splits into two completely separate and genuinely distinct reactions, and both of them need to be addressed honestly rather than dismissed. The referee made a call. The call was an illegal screen. Not a flagrant foul, not a technical foul, not an ejection or any escalated response. A standard illegal screen violation. And there are people who look at that call and argue it represents a referee doing their job correctly. The reasoning goes like this. Moving screens and illegal screening actions are among the most chronically, systematically undercalled violations in the modern professional basketball game. The fact that this official identified the play, recognized the screening action as illegal, and made any call at all is, and by the standard of how these situations typically get handled, actually a moment of competent officiating. The play was flagged. The violation was acknowledged. Credit where credit is due. That argument has internal logic. It cannot be completely dismissed. The call was made, and acknowledging that matters. But here is where the other reaction enters, and it is the louder reaction, the one that is driving the majority of the conversation since this footage surfaced. The argument being made, forcefully and with the footage to support it, is that what Stewart did to Cunningham went substantially beyond the boundaries of what an illegal screen call adequately addresses. The contact was deliberate. The elbow was directed. The physical nature of what happened, when you watch it carefully and honestly, looks like it clears the threshold for a flagrant foul designation rather than a routine screening violation. Because those two things are not equivalent. They do not carry the same message. An illegal screen says the play was technically improper within the rules of basketball. A flagrant foul says something different. It says the contact was unnecessary and excessive, that a player crossed a line the rules exist specifically to protect against, and that the appropriate response requires more than a standard violation call. The flagrant foul threshold exists for exactly these situations. And when you look at this footage, when you watch the deliberateness of the contact, the direction of the elbow, and then the immediate hands-up performance that followed, it is genuinely difficult to make the case that the standard illegal screen designation was sufficient. Now, a comparison has been introduced into this discussion that needs to be addressed directly. The argument being made by some people is that Sophie Cunningham did essentially the same thing Stewart did in a separate play later in that same game. The claim is equivalence. The claim is that if you are going to criticize Stewart's action, you have to apply the same standard to Cunningham. That argument sounds reasonable on its surface. Consistency matters, double standards matter, all of that is true. But here is the problem with the equivalence argument. When you actually watch both plays side by side, when you examine them with the same level of attention and the same honest eye, the comparison does not hold up. In Cunningham's case, the player on the receiving end does not react the way Cunningham reacted to Stewart's contact. The physical impact visible in the footage is not comparable. And most critically, and this is the detail that matters most, Cunningham does not throw her hands up afterward. She does not engage in the immediate performance of innocence that Stewart deployed the moment after making contact. That difference is not cosmetic. That difference is the entire argument. When contact in a basketball game is genuinely incidental, when it happens in the natural competitive flow without deliberate intent, you keep playing. The hands-up gesture is not a reflex that emerges from clean competition. It is a reflex that emerges from awareness. Awareness that what you just did might require explaining. Cunningham did not have that awareness because her play did not generate it. Stewart's play generated it immediately. Sophie Cunningham plays a physical, aggressive, competitive style. She brings an edge to this Indiana roster that is part of what makes her valuable. She is going to be in contested physical situations repeatedly throughout this regular season against opponents who understand exactly how she plays and who will test her limits at every opportunity. And the precedent being established right now in a preseason game before the stakes are at their highest is something that matters. If the precedent is that deliberate, directed elbow contact against Sophie Cunningham results in an illegal screen call and nothing further, then that precedent is a problem. Not just for Cunningham individually, but for the Indiana Fever as an organization trying to protect their players across an entire professional season. Sophie Cunningham deserves to be protected on that basketball floor. That is not a complicated position. That is the straightforward, basic expectation for any professional player in any professional league. Now let's pull back and look at the larger context, because this incident does not exist in isolation. It exists within a pattern that the Indiana Fever fan base has been observing and documenting with increasing intensity. There is a feeling, and it is not irrational. It is not manufactured from thin air. It is built on a series of observed moments over time, that the Indiana Fever and their players do not consistently receive the level of institutional protection and officiating attention that a team of their prominence and profile should reasonably expect. This team generates more attention than any other franchise in the WNBA right now, by a significant margin. Their games are watched by more people. Their players are scrutinized at a level that has no equivalent elsewhere in the league. The cultural and commercial footprint of this franchise is expanding in real time. And when plays like the Stewart Cunningham incident happen, when footage of deliberate physical contact surfaces a day after the game through a fan's phone rather than through official broadcast documentation, and the in-game response is a standard screening violation rather than a flagrant foul, that pattern feeds a narrative. The narrative that the Fever's players are not consistently getting the floor protection that their profile, their prominence, and basic professional standards demand. This narrative can be overstated. Context always matters. Officials miss things in every game involving every team. Broadcast cameras have physical limitations. These constraints are real. The officiating community is not a monolithic entity executing a coordinated agenda. Those are fair caveats and they deserve acknowledgement. But the frequency of these moments, the regularity with which Indiana's players end up on the receiving end of physical contact that generates post-game controversy when the footage finally emerges, is something that deserves honest examination rather than reflexive dismissal. Caitlin Clark's situation in this same game adds a separate but connected dimension to that examination. Beyond the Stewart Cunningham incident, footage has also surfaced showing Clark absorbing physical contact from a Liberty defender during a play, contact that is visible, that is not subtle or ambiguous, and that was apparently not called during live action. Clark is the most watched player in the WNBA. That is the documented reality of where this league stands right now. Every game she plays is examined at a level no other player in this league currently experiences. When footage shows her taking contact that goes unaddressed by the officials, the frustration that generates is entirely predictable and entirely understandable. These are not the reactions of irrational fans looking for grievances. These are the reactions of people who are paying close attention and who see a consistent gap between what is happening on the floor and what is being called. The Indiana Fever fan base that surfaced this footage, that found the fan video, analyzed the Stewart Cunningham contact carefully, and brought it into the public conversation the day after the game, is not going to become less engaged as the regular season begins. That is simply not how this fan base operates. They are going to be more engaged, more attentive, more thorough. Every physical incident, Every questionable non-call, every moment of post-game review is going to be amplified at a level that reflects the enormous attention this franchise commands. That is the environment the league is operating in now. Whether the institutional structures are fully prepared for it or not, the league needs to take this seriously, not as a PR matter, not as a fan relations issue to be managed, as a genuine question about how physical play is being adjudicated and how player protection is being prioritized when the most watched team in the league is on the floor. Breanna Stewart is a prominent, established, important player in the WNBA. Her presence in this league matters, and her contributions to it are real. None of that changes what the footage shows, and the fact that she is a prominent player is precisely the reason. The response to this incident cannot simply be to let the in-game illegal screen call stand as the final institutional word and move on. When a player of her profile is involved in a play that generates this level of documented post-game controversy, the response has to be proportionate to what the evidence actually shows. The old guard versus new generation narrative has played out in sports before. It always has a surface-level appeal, the established veteran and the gritty newcomer colliding in a charged atmosphere. But what actually matters here is not the narrative frame. What matters is the footage. What matters is what the footage documents. What matters is whether the institutions responsible for managing this league are going to engage with that footage seriously or allow it to disappear into the preseason without meaningful consequence. The Fever won the game. That result stands and it deserves recognition. Indiana walked out of New York with a convincing victory that said something real about this team's intentions for the coming season. But the footage from that night, the Stewart-Cunningham contact, the Clark situation, the post-game review process that surfaced both, raised questions that a final score cannot resolve and that an illegal screen call did not fully answer. The fan in the arena captured what the broadcast did not. The Indiana Fever community amplified what that fan captured. And now this play is part of the permanent documented record of this preseason, part of the ongoing conversation about how this team's players are being protected on the floor, and part of the larger question about what standards the WNBA intends to uphold as it enters a regular season carrying more attention and more scrutiny than any season before it. That conversation is not going away. It is going to follow this team into opening night and beyond. It is going to be present in every game where physical contact involving Indiana's players goes to the edge of what the rules are designed to address. And how the league responds to what this footage shows, whether it reviews the play, whether any additional action follows, whether the officiating community takes the evidence seriously, will tell you something real and something important about the direction of this league. Because the fans are watching everything now. They are documenting everything. They have the footage, they have the slow motion analysis, they have the frame-by-frame breakdown, and they are not going to stop bringing these moments into the light simply because the official broadcast chose not to capture them. That is where we are. That is what this situation actually represents. And the question sitting at the center of all of it is straightforward. Is the WNBA going to meet this moment with the institutional seriousness it demands? Or is it going to let the in-game call stand and hope the conversation dies down before the regular season begins? Based on the Indiana Fever fan base's track record of relentless forensic engagement with exactly these situations, the second option is not a realistic one. The conversation is already here. The footage is already out. The questions are already being asked. All that remains to be seen is whether anyone in a position of institutional responsibility is actually going to answer them.